Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to actually put my proper name in my box. I am Rabbi Marcia Tilchin, and I'm the founder of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County, and I'm here with my colleague and young friend and great teacher, Rabbi Daniel Levine, who works for Orange County Hillel. He's sort of the Hillel educator on all three campuses in Orange County: Chapman, Cal State Fullerton, and UC Irvine. I'll let him tell a little bit about himself, as will I. And then what I thought would be nice is we'll be learning together for 18 weeks. And Daniel and I would like to know why you are taking this class, sort of what you bring to the table, what you're looking for, that kind of thing, what you're hoping to gain from this sort of intensive survey course of all things Jewish. So Daniel, why don't you start and just share a little bit about who you are so everybody knows about one of our great teachers.
Sure. Well, thank you for the introduction, Marcia. So my name is Daniel. I'm a Southern California native between San Diego, Los Angeles, and now in Orange County. I sort of wear a couple different hats in the community. I sort of have a bad hobby, I think, of collecting different Jewish teaching roles, which I really love. So my sort of main role is I'm the rabbi for Hillel in Orange County. And so I get to spend my days on college campuses helping college students really explore the ins and outs of Judaism, Jewish identity, and Israel, which I really love. And I've also had the opportunity to teach them courses in the Jewish Studies department at UC Irvine, which has been really nice. And then also do some congregational work over at Temple Beth Tikva, which I knew Reb Marcia before, but that's really where we connected professionally. And I'm really excited to be here throughout this journey with everyone here.
And what I just want to share is that as I started to sit in with Daniel when we were co-teaching, I found myself thinking, God, he's a great teacher. I wish I had taught that like that. So it's the best compliment you can pay to somebody. And I think you'll really find, as he and I are going to be rotating the classes. And I'll also tell you a little bit about myself. We'll be, I'll teach a week, he'll teach a week, whatever. And sometimes we'll teach a little bit together. And one of the things we really hope will happen is because all the classes will sort of involve engagement. So this is not a passive program. Well, this is a chance for people to share ideas and share questions. So we need you to not be on your avatar, whatever they call it. We need you to be in your person to the best of your ability, unless, of course, you're driving or something like that. So I'll just say a little bit about myself. I'm coming into my 21st year living in Orange County, moved here 2 decades ago to serve a conservative congregation in Tustin, and worked there for 13 years. Came here as a cantor and finished my rabbinic studies in Los Angeles at the Ziegler School. And then I started this unique and independent organization that tries to build Jewish community through collaboration in a lot of different ways. That's why it's called the Jewish Collaborative. We collaborate with synagogues, organizations, individual talented people like Daniel, many different ways. And we try to sort of spread Jewish engagement opportunities and sort of like the cracks and crevices where they're not necessarily always found. And that's our goal, is to sort of, reach more people in a really accessible and meaningful way. And this is the third or maybe the fourth time we're offering a cohort of Intro to Judaism. And it's designed both as a class for people who are considering conversion, and just as much for people who may already be Jewish and looking to really round out some foundational knowledge that they might have missed, either because they grew up in a secular home or missed that day in Hebrew school or stopped learning when they were 7. So that kind of stuff. So that's why we do this. Pat, you're sort of in the Hollywood squares. You're sort of next on my thing. So would you share a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Thank you. I have taken some I grew up in a Christian household, and somehow over COVID, I've taken so many religion classes and things, but I have always been really impressed by the rabbis more than anybody else, and realized that even though I have grown up in a relatively Jewish community and have many friends who are, I really don't know that much about, I mean, other than general knowledge. And I thought it would be a great time to learn.
Wonderful. Pat, where do you live? I know you were all over the country. So where do you reside?
I live in West Hollywood.
Oh, you're practically a neighbor. Okay, great. All righty. Wonderful. Well, welcome. I think you're in for a great treat, and I'm so glad you're here. Esther Lassman, I see that you have written your name in Hebrew. Can you share a little bit about yourself with us? Hey there, Esther. Oh, I think you're on mute, Esther. Hang on.
Can you see me?
Yes.
I can't see. I am on my cell phone trying to get to my laptop. And anyway, I'm so excited to be in your adventure, journey, whatever you want to call it. As you can hear in my accent, I'm an Israeli who I've been in the United States for almost 36 years. I grew up in a completely secular environment in Israel. And but in my last couple of years, I found myself more interested in Jewish studies. I mean, I worked for the last 34 years in a research institute for Jewish studies at the University of Pennsylvania. And I feel more spiritual lately in the last couple of years. So when I saw your email, I thought, I think that's for me.
Fantastic. Esther, we're so thrilled that you're here, and welcome. And
I usually don't use my cell phone for Zooms, and I have a new laptop, and I'm trying to get to the link, and I can't find it. So you will excuse me, I will shut off the camera here and try to get to my laptop.
absolutely. Thank you for introducing yourself.
Thank you.
Dina, would you tell us a little bit about you and your beautiful family?
Hey, yes, my name is Dina, and over here is Sean, and over here is my daughter Naomi. This is my son Sean, and so I grew up Jewish. I actually went to a religious school up to only until 5th grade. My dad's Israeli. My mom converted from Christianity to Judaism when they were married. And then as a teenager, I kind of got away from Judaism, and I'm looking to reconnect to my spirituality and teach my kids more about Judaism while we do and have always celebrated most of the high holidays. That's kind of where their knowledge has ended. So that's why we're here, and I'm hoping that they can join us for more sessions, if not all, but I'll be here for every session.
Fantastic. It's so nice to have you. And yes, I'll never, it's so amazing, like that, that you grew up with like an Israeli father. That's just a very unusual thing. And so I'm sure it'll just be fun for you to learn more. And also, so I just, Sean and Naomi, we're going to record everything. And if you like the class, even if you can't be there, you can watch it, and your mom can go over stuff with you if you want. So that'll be terrific. Yoni, can you tell us why you are here? You have a very interesting background. Are you willing to come on screen, Yoni? Marcia Saltz, is that you? Are you with us? Trying to figure out Joan. Yoel.
I'm just unmuting. So excuse me for not having my video on. I'm on the East Coast and it's a little later for us. So I'm not really on right now. But anyway, I have a pretty rich background in Judaism, but frankly, I want to fill in the blanks, and always learn more. So I was very interested to register and come online. And thank you so much.
How did you find out about us, Joan?
Well, I took Rabbi Daniel Levine's course in Jewish history, and I was just blown away by it. And you couldn't have said it better, what a wonderful teacher he is. So, so I signed up for this as well.
Terrific. Where on the East Coast are you? I'm just sort of trying to get.
Boston.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Celtics are doing great. This whole city is like just exuberant.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay.
It's wonderful to meet you, Joan.
Thank you so much, and you as well.
So Saltz, I see Mel,
Yes.
but I feel like it's not Mel.
Yeah, it's Marcia.
Okay.
And so I grew up in a conservative home, went to Hebrew school in Mount Vernon, New York, Westchester County. And when the 73 war broke out in Israel, I went over as a volunteer and I milked cows on a kibbutz. And then came back to the States, then went back to Israel and lived there for 13 years. So I'm fluent in Hebrew and I really miss living in Israel.
Oh.
Yeah.
And are you back in New York?
No, I live in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay. And so are you, do you have some, sort of Jewish, like learning under your belt? You must.
Yes,
a little.
I do. Yeah, I just wanted to learn more. It's always good to
Yes,
stay informed.
I couldn't agree more. And we hope that sort of everybody will sort of zero in on whatever level they come to this with. And Daniel will talk to you about that.
Great. And thank you.
Welcome, Marcia. Barbara Sanders, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Here we are. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. So I'm not Jewish. I think my early childhood was a combination of Shinto, because my father was in Japan post-World War II. And I had we would call her a nanny today, so we went everywhere. When I got back to the States, probably a couple of years from like 5 to 7 in a pretty evangelical kind of Christian church.
Okay.
And then Grandma thought that was way too much hellfire and brimstone for little Barbara Ann. So in this small Indiana town, they sent me to the Methodist church, was mainstream. By the time I was in junior high, I had some very serious doubts about most of what I was learning in my Sunday school classes, and began a probably exploration of different religious points of view, which got me all the way through high school. In my early 20s, I stumbled across Unitarian Universalism, which, as you may or may not, started as primarily each of those branches were basically theologically Christian, but over the years they have become increasingly liberal for the most part, more strongly related, I think, to Reform Judaism and perhaps humanism are elements that I respond to and relate to more. My husband and I have been going to Torah study at a congregation in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for a number of years. And since the pandemic, we're still going, but we're doing our classes on Zoom. And we just have an ongoing, abiding, curiosity is not the right word, interest perhaps. Did I
Yes.
lose you? Oh,
No.
okay.
We're right with you.
Interest and appreciation for the varieties of Judaism and the commonalities that we share.
Lovely. I think that's fantastic. I'm so happy that you're here. And and I'm guessing that, okay, so the only people we haven't heard from, well, Nadia Williams, are you the one on the phone? And if so, can you unmute and just share a little bit about yourself?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Nadia.
Where are you phoning in from, Nadia?
Long Beach, California.
Okay. And how did you find out about the class, and sort of what are you looking for to get out of it? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
I have a friend actually who told me about the class. My dad is actually Jewish. He's Russian Jewish, but he didn't really want me to know too much about his family or heritage. So I'm kind of here to learn more about Judaism.
That's fantastic. Did you grow up in Long Beach?
I actually grew up in Pasadena, but I moved to Long Beach because it's better suited to my life.
Wonderful. Well, I hope we'll be able to someday. Will we be able to see you on screen sometimes? Maybe.
Yes, I apologize. I'm coming from an appointment, so I'm on my phone right now.
Okay, but well. Anyway, no, that's great, and I'm just thrilled that you're here, and I really do hope you get a lot out of this class.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so Daryl/Yoel, can you hear me? I know I know we've been together in a couple other classes. Can you share a little bit about you?
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
All right. I live here in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been since the pandemic started, I've been interested in Judaism. I took a introduction to Judaism class with the Miller Introduction Judaism course with Rabbi Kamen here, and Rabbi Kamen and actually Rabbi Ariel Wopi here in Atlanta at Congregation Street, Israel. And I was just willing to learn more.
Well, but I know both Ariel and Dan. I went to school with both of them, and they're just fabulous. And this class, what's interesting, Yoel, is that it's going to be similar and totally different, because anytime you put a different teacher in front of you, it's a different class. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
So I hope you get a lot out of it. Is there something specific that you'd like to learn more about? Danielle and I would love to know what that is.
I really nothing specific at this time. I'm just really here to learn everything I can, soak in everything I can.
Are you on a path to conversion?
Yes.
Wonderful. And is Dan Kamen your sponsoring rabbi? Not Dan, Ari.
No, Ariel Wopi. Yes.
Oh, yes. Is she? Well, please tell her that Marcia Tilchin says hello and sends my very best. And I'm really glad you're here. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And Yoni, you're the last person to say something. Can you hear me? We see your avatar, but we don't see you. Okay. Well, hopefully Yoni will join us soon. I will say that Yoni lives in Florida. I feel like there he is. No, there's Yoel, but no Yoni. Okay. Well, Yoni lives in Florida, and he's looking to make Aliyah. He's actually he has a background probably closer to yours, Daniel, than so I wasn't sure why he took this class, but I'm really glad he's here. Okay. That's enough for the introductions. We'll get to meet each other again through our conversations. So I just wanted to do a quick I wanted to share my screen and just go over like the tentative syllabus and talk about a few like housekeeping things before we dive into our lesson for today. Is that okay? Thumbs up? Is that okay? Everybody give me a thumbs up. Okay. Everyone's like, we don't care. Okay, hold on. I hope you can see my screen. No, that's not what I wanted you to see. Can everybody see my screen? Say yes.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So, we're hoping to meet 18 times between now and September 18th. I just wanted to go over a few things, like a couple of the classes are on the Monday evenings of a holiday weekend, but Daniel and I still wanted to try to do those classes if we could, if we'd have at least, let's say, 6 or 7 people, so that we, just because we don't want this to go like too long into the fall, we want to sort of finish before the high holidays. So today we're going to be looking at what Judaism is, because it's so complicated, and it's a religion, it's a peoplehood, it's a culture, and it's a spiritual practice. So we'll be learning all about that. Next week, I'm going to give you an overview of the Jewish calendar, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. We'll do a survey of Jewish history as told through biblical and rabbinic literature. We'll do Jewish views of God, which is going to be like, how do you do that in 90 minutes? That'll be interesting. Again, a day on Shabbat, introduction to halakha and mitzvot, daily prayer, Jewish life cycles, streams of major streams of Jewish philosophy, Zionistic philosophies, the 3 festivals, the later holidays, anti-Semitism, an introduction to the high holidays, how we got from Torah to modern Judaism, how do you go from the line, thou shalt not boil a kid in its mother's milk, to having like a kitchen with 2 sets of dishes, 2 dishwashers, et cetera, like what happened? A history of women's roles in Jewish life and leadership and what they symbolize in terms of Judaism being open to advances in social progress. We're going to have a class where you guys get to write in all your lingering questions and ask me and Daniel. And then, we'll leave you with current challenges within Jewish community and where we go from here. And as we go from class to class, we'll check in and see, if we know that there's a specific week that isn't going to work and most people aren't going to be here, we'll shift, we'll go later if we have to. So any questions or before Daniel dives into teaching for today?
The program is amazing, but we need at least 18 years for this.
Exactly.
You're
Oh, and by the way, if you don't own the books that we recommended on the sheet, I hope that you will get them. You can buy many of them used very inexpensively. But what Daniel and I will do is try to send you the chapters from each of the resource materials that we recommend if you want to do some pre-reading to make certain classes more relevant or engaging. Okay, Daniel, I'm turning it over to you.
Excuse me, I don't remember getting any name of books. Would you mind to put it in the chat or send it to me by email?
Esther, did you get the email that went out today from me that was a reminder of the class?
I will check. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, what an honor to be here with everybody. I'm excited to journey here, and just to echo one thing that Rabbi Marcia said. This is hopefully going to be, I guess, no pun intended, because of the Jewish Collaborative, but as collaborative as possible in terms of conversation and ideas. And really just where I sort of wanted to start off, just to say this as a basis for the class, one of the ways in which Judaism has really been studied for the past 3,000 years has been engaging in dialogue. And so there's obviously 2 different dominant educational models that one could imagine. One is a person sitting at the front of a classroom sort of giving information, and the other is more interactive, bottom-up communal discussion where then it sort of arises bottom up in terms of coming up with ideas. And one of the things that we'll explore in the next 18 weeks is really most Jewish wisdom and knowledge and community practice is much more the second one. And so a lot of the ideas that we'll be exploring aren't ideas that, people in some metaphorical ivory tower came up with and then, foisted onto a community, but really the history of Judaism is a long history of really interpersonal reaction and discussion and a lot of debate. Of course, Jews love a good debate, as we'll get right into. Before we start with any actual sources or anything, we wanted to just start with this big picture question of what is Judaism, which I think, as Esther said before, I think we could spend 18 years discussing just that one question. But I'm curious if anybody here has an intuition. If you had to define Judaism in a word or a sentence, and you can feel free to unmute, you can feel free to write in the chat, whatever people are more comfortable with. I'd love to hear some preliminary thoughts, and there's no good or bad answers.
Well, I think of Judaism as, a people and a culture and a religion. And it always seems very food oriented, eat this, it symbolizes that. And like a way of life. It just seems like so much more than just a religion. I don't know.
Wonderful. Yeah. So Dina's saying that Judaism is a lot more than a religion, and you gave a whole bunch of adjectives, which I totally agree with. Nadia says it is a community. So I think, again, getting onto that idea that there's something more than a religion going on, which we'll explore in a second. Esther says a set of values, which I think is also really interesting. It is interesting that nobody said religion, which is usually where a lot of people start, and for good reason. And, this might be getting into the weeds a little bit, but I think this comment will be helpful just to ground us. A lot of terms that people use in the modern world to describe things, whether we're talking religion or nation or ethnicity, these are very modern words. And so actually one of the things that a lot of Jewish historians, write about is there's no word for religion in ancient Judaism. The closest word is maybe the word dat for those who speak a little bit of Hebrew, which the Torah uses, but really the Torah uses that word to mean a set of laws. And if you think about it, right, today we sort of all take for granted that you can have a separate institution and separate realm of our lives called religion, and maybe a separate identity that we call an ethnicity, or a separate geographical locale that we call a nation or nationality. But a lot of times these words are anachronistic when tried to apply to the past. And Judaism ends up coming at the intersection of a lot of these things, which makes it so fun and enjoyable, and also so complicated. And this isn't just complicated for people that this might be their first foray into the vague or ill-defined definition of Jewish identity. This is something that internally in the Jewish community, we still can't figure out. And for good reason, because it's a question that doesn't seem to have a neat answer. And so I just want to give like a 2 or 3 minute overview as to why, and then we'll delve into some sources. And again, I'm hoping that this will be very conversational. So one of the ways in which academics or scholars of religion define a religion is a set of foundational ideas or dogmas that then a community decides whether or not to believe in or not, which causes them to act in a certain way. And so obviously we can, endlessly nitpick that definition, and it doesn't mean that all religious people believe in all the dogmas. But if you were on Jeopardy and somebody says, define religion, you're probably pretty safe with that answer. One of the strange things that happened in terms of Judaism from a historic perspective is we started off, and we'll explore this a little bit more with Jewish history. So if I say this and people want more, we'll wait a couple weeks. But we started off as a people that then in parallel developed a set of views, ideologies, and rituals alongside the peoplehood, as opposed to afterwards. And so just the most concrete way to think about this by way of analogy, and I'll just use Christianity and Islam both as just fellow examples, because Judaism's oftentimes packaged as, the 3 Abrahamic religions or monotheistic religions. with both Christianity and Islam, there really was one, or in the case of Christianity, a couple of founders of a new tradition that came up with ideas and beliefs, and then subsequently those ideas spread. And so the power of the spread of Christianity or the spread of Islam is really the power of the spreading of ideas. And right, that's what makes them, from some perspective, a pure religion. With Judaism, it was always a little bit different. And again, we'll discuss in a little bit more detail Jewish history, but even the word Jew or Judaism actually comes from the root Judean or Judea, which is to say the tribal group that lived in ancient Israel if we stepped into a time machine and went about 3,000 years ago. And so already we're dealing with a definition that's a little bit strange. And then, of course, Judaism as a part religious tradition did develop ideas, but all of those ideas developed just within, at least initially, the tribal group of Judeans or their predecessors, the Israelites. And so we've constantly within Judaism had a ethnic / tribal identity evolving parallel to a religious identity. And if anybody here is thinking, well, that sounds really confusing and creates a lot of tension and contradictions, welcome to the last 3,000 years of Jewish history, because there are, of course, times where those two things come into tension, right? If Judaism is a ethnicity / people / tribe, whatever word we want to use, then one, there'd be no way to leave, and two, it would be very hard to join. If Judaism, on the other hand, is a pure religion, right? One can believe in it, one could cease to believe and leave it, right? The definition becomes a lot more fluid. But what happens if you're both, right? What happens if you're a tradition that is defined both by what I'll call peoplehood and also defined as a religious tradition? You get a lot of really interesting developments. So just one of the most interesting one, and then I'll take Esther, your question in 20 seconds, is the idea of conversion in Judaism, when again, compared to a lot of pure religious traditions, where for them, conversion might be opting into a certain set of beliefs. And once one is opted into a certain set of beliefs, and usually it's sealed with a prayer, which speaks to the adoption of a set of beliefs, they have successfully converted into a new tradition. With Judaism, on the other hand, our conversion process is a lot more akin to what we might imagine an adoption ceremony to be, right? It takes a long time. You're with community for a while. It's a lot more than any set of belief or any idea. It's about adopting a whole way of life. Esther, I'll take your question real quick, and then I'll open it up for other thoughts.
If I understood you correctly, you connect Judaism to the source Judea, so the connection to a land, to a piece of location. And at the same time, we know the Jewish history for 2,000 years, they were not connected to the land. So it's so interesting for me to hear Judaism as something that is connected to a place-oriented, instead of any other definition. So that's what I wanted to contribute.
And just to reiterate, thank you so much for that comment. That wasn't necessarily even a political or national statement. It was really a historical one, which I'm excited to explore more when we'll talk about Jewish history. We'll talk about modern day Israel and Zionism and a lot of different definitions. And it does totally get confounded. And one of the things we'll see over the course of really Judaism as a whole is all of the different iterations that Judaism has taken over the last really 4,000 years. And so one of the things that's the most interesting about Judaism and why it's so multifaceted and rich, and why there's also, let's say, the famous joke, if you ask 2 Jews, you get 3 opinions on anything, and why that's actually true, right? There's about 14 million Jews in the world, and probably about 15 million different definitions of what it means to be Jewish and everything like that, is because there really were all these, our culture and people and religious traditions went through major iterations over history to change our identity. And so one of the big ones, which of course we'll talk about, this is sort of just a little overview, is we went from being situated in a land, the land of Israel, with having a centralized temple, the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem, where that was the dominant mode of practice for 900 years, give or take. You know, there were some years where it was destroyed. There was a second one built. We'll get into all the nitty details. And if you were to go into a time machine and you were to, you know, drop into the 7th century BCE, and you were to ask people what they were doing for Passover, for the upcoming holiday of Shavuot, or for Shabbat, they would say, of course, we're going to the temple with everybody else. We bought a nice lamb to sacrifice on, you know, and have the priests, who were a separate class of people, to do it. And that would have been their way of celebrating Passover. And of course, today we all sit down and have a Passover Seder, which is much more of a conversation. Obviously, there's ritual, but the rituals are just a symbolic nod to some extent, and they're trying to get us to ask questions and all of those things. And so if somebody were to ask, well, which one is Judaism? The answer is sort of both and neither, and a mixture of evolution there. And so one way in which I think is just a really helpful analogy to understanding Judaism, and I'll say this, and then we'll get some more comments or questions or thoughts, and then I'd love to go into a little bit of text for this first one. In future classes, by the way, or some of them, we'll be doing some breakout rooms and some chavruta study, which the word chavruta comes from the Hebrew word chaver, which is really a friend, but it's really more than a friend. It's a thought partner. And so really, again, the way in which Judaism historically has been studied is not having somebody on Zoom. Well, they didn't have Zoom until about 3 years ago, but it's not to have somebody sort of dictate ideas top down, but really it is the partnership between 2 or 3 people studying together. But there's the famous Greek philosophic picture of the ship, where you imagine a ship that's sailing across the sea, and this ship was, just for easy sake, let's say, is made up of 1,000 different wooden boards. And over the course of the voyage, obviously it's a long voyage, and so different boards get rusted and they start to disintegrate. And so the people on the ship, every day, they end up replacing a couple of these boards with new boards. And the thought experiment goes, let's say every day they replace 3 of the 4 boards, and there's only 1,000 boards. Sorry for those who are not mathematically minded here. So after about 333 or 334 days, they've effectively replaced the entire ship. And so the entire ship is now different than the ship that set off sail. And so the question is that still the same ship? And so it's an interesting question. The same analogy, by the way, goes for, if we think about how our biology works and our cells, which, you know, not to open up a whole philosophic can of worms, but with Judaism, it's very much the same way, right? There could be, for argument's sake, right? I don't actually believe what I'm about to say, but just to, for argument's sake here, there could be we could have 0 in common with your average Jew who was trekking through the desert 3,400 years ago, in terms of ritual, in terms of how we're going to celebrate Shabbat, in terms of any of this, and yet it's still the same ship. It's still the same tradition. And the thought experiment, of course, goes, well, if that ship were to dock into the harbor and they were to remodel the entire ship, right, maybe that's a different ship, right? So it's not that Judaism every generation can completely change, and Judaism, right? Judaism's also not, because I want to be careful not to sound like Judaism is whatever we want it to be, right? It's not a free-for-all of, yes, Judaism is whatever, you know, today the 12 of us or 13 of us all decide we want it to be. But also the interesting thought of the thought experiment, and also the interesting part of Jewish history, is that if that ship never gets replaced, it's going to sink. And it's the same as Judaism. If there were moments in our history where we didn't adapt and didn't change and didn't evolve, Judaism would have ceased to exist. And if we evolved too quickly, we also would have ceased to be Judaism. And so the constant, right, the big picture, and something that, again, just I really wanted to stress this on the first class, is that Judaism is constantly having this dance between tradition and between innovation. And it's really this timeless dance of Jewish tradition that makes it so rich. And in a second, we'll introduce some sources that I think elucidate this point better than me, but I would love to hear some thoughts, comments. How are people feeling? Any questions that people have at this point before we dive into some text study?
I just want to ask you, did you make up that ship analogy? Because it's so clever.
No, I definitely did not. I forgot the Greek thinker here. I'm gonna this is the benefit of having doing this on Zoom is that here, this is it. It's the ship of Theseus.
Okay. Well, I love how you explain that. And yeah. And I just want to say, like, it is, you know, for you know, when we think about even Jewish law, and some of the ideas and restrictions, or I don't want to, not restrictions in a bad way, but some of the guideposts. There are guideposts that we have to follow, but like 3,000 years ago, they didn't have a word for, I mean, there was no electricity. You know, I mean, there's just so many different things that we have to grapple with today. Like, when can you do this and when can you do that? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so part of what those boards are is saying, how do you take Jewish values? One of you had said that Judaism is a system of values and apply it to different practical matters in life that allow you to be guided by a Jewish lens, a Jewish light, even with a modern challenge. And that's the ship. And the ship's going to keep going. I can promise you that 500 years from now, forget it, 50 years from now, people who are living a Jewish life are going to be grappling with issues that we can't even articulate now. But because the boards get changed a little by little, there's always new material to walk on. So I just love it. Okay, Daniel, just going back to that.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear some comments and questions before we'll dive into a few texts in a moment, but I'd love to hear where people are at.
Well, I have a comment. I do think that adaptation is really important. And so, you know, I grew up in a very like a Lubavitch sort of school where it felt like, because my family wasn't Lubavitch, that there were these different levels of Judaism, and like this person was like a higher level Jew that because they kept kosher and did everything like to a T and dressed a certain way, and you know, so I don't know. And I feel like modern day, like you should be able to be Jewish, and yeah, I mean, I don't feel that way anymore, but when I was sort of inserted into that school setting, like there was like these different levels of Judaism. And I feel like it's important to accept like all levels.
Yes.
That maybe there were times when Judaism wasn't as adaptive and maybe as they could have been, but I feel like maybe they came around. I don't know if that was just a personal experience or if other people feel that way too, but.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the comment. And I want to say, I mean, there's so many things I want to say. I'll say two things because I can probably go on forever here. One, you're certainly right. There have been, you know, ebbs and flows of Jewish history and times where people have been more open to change and times where people have been less. And also, Judaism's never been, even at any given historic era that we pop into, it's never been a monolith in terms of where the community's at. And so there's always sort of been a range within individual Jewish communities in terms of how much one wants to change and adapt. And one of the interesting things that I always think of is there were a lot of, and we'll discuss this more in the Jewish history component, but there were times in Jewish history where the change that people were pushing for, there were other people who were struggling against the change. And looking back, that change is now the traditional Jewish approach. So, I mean, the most obvious example, which, and then Esther, I'll take your comment in 1 second, but one of the most important, or the most important corpus of text in Jewish tradition is called the Talmud or the Midrash, right? I'm going to use those two interchangeably, even though there are slight differences between them. But this is a corpus of work that was created between, let's say, about the year 0 to 900 CE. So over the course of almost 1,000 years. And these texts are really the basis of Judaism. It's funny because a lot of people might think that the Torah or the Hebrew Bible, or otherwise called the Old Testament, right, is the basis of Judaism. And a couple of years ago, I actually had a really interesting conversation with a college student who came to me, and she didn't grow up Jewish, but had become really interested in Judaism. And she came to, I was on campus and I was meeting with some students, and she emailed me and we found a time to meet. And she started off by saying, I'm so interested in Judaism, and I've been thinking about becoming more involved in the community and maybe thinking about converting. And I just want you to know that in preparation over the summer, I read the entirety of the Old Testament. And to me, I was so taken aback. I was like, first of all, that's really impressive, because I don't know many Jews that have actually read through the entirety of the Tanakh, which is what traditional Jews call the Old Testament. And two, when we started discussing, I was like, so what did you think? And, we discussed all the different books. And she said, but I understand Jews even less now. I don't understand how there's any parallel. And so my response to her was, well, Jews don't really study the Torah by itself. We study the Torah refracted through about 2,000 years of commentary and discussion and debate about these texts. And it sort of, I think, opened her eyes to something that is very counterintuitive, I think, in a religious tradition. And that is really the evolution and development, and really the discussion about texts in Judaism has been almost as important, if not more so, than the actual text itself. And so that is to say, just to get to your point, because I realized that was a far off tangent, but I promise here's how it connects, is at the time where this commentary was being written, the Talmud, which really allowed Judaism to evolve from a temple-centric, Israel-centric, having a king-centric tradition to a tradition that can be practiced in Los Angeles, is this corpus of work. And we know historically there were people at the time in the year, let's say 100 CE, or even the year 100 BCE, that were against any type of interpretation. And their view was, if you're not a biblical literalist, you've lost tradition. And the sort of irony of history is that worldview was not able to survive, right? We have no, right, they were a group called the Sadducees, or the Tzedukim in Hebrew, and they just have ceased to exist. And so, right, so it's always tough to say, right, there tends to be this view, and this will be the last thing I say, and then Esther, I'll take your comment. There's oftentimes a fallacy, I think, in any type of culture that's trying to preserve itself. So whether we're talking about Judaism, or we can draw, whatever parallels we want to any political issue, that the best way to preserve a culture is to stop change. And the irony of that approach is, when we try to stop all change, we're effectively putting Judaism or the culture into a museum. And when things are in a museum, they're nice, right? They're interesting, right? You observe it, but you can't touch, right? You can't interact with the thing. And so what happens is it gets frozen, and it becomes an interesting cross slice of history, but it becomes increasingly less relevant to future generations. And when we don't have that, fear that causes us to freeze any culture, but in this case, obviously Judaism, in time, we're able to keep it relevant. And like, what we want is for the next generation to play around with it, and to get it messy, and to do things that 100 years ago they would have thought was crazy or couldn't even have imagined. Marcia, I didn't know, were you about to say something?
Well, yes, I did. And I just wanted to say something interesting. And Dina, this is an answer to your question, but what's also, like, I feel that your family is living proof that the boards are changing, meaning you had sort of a unique and unconventional upbringing in many phases of it. And here you are now sitting with your two delightful teenagers and, opening a door. And for me and Daniel, like, this is the greatest privilege in the world to be able to open Judaism to you with no judgment. It was bad. It was it's all like the Jewish family is so much more expansive today than I think our parents could have imagined even 60 years ago. It just is. And that's the beauty. Those are the boards changing in the boat. And I think for everybody here, for Esther and for Yoel and for, just if we were to do a deep dive into everybody on this class right now, it would blow your mind at how different you all were and why you're all taking this class. And that's the Jewish peoplehood that we're here to embrace. So I just wanted to say, I think it's fantastic. And I loved your question. And let's do Etty. And then do you have a source sheet, Daniel, for us today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll share my screen so to make it easier for everyone. But I'm happy to share it if people want the material also.
I just want to mention my grandfather was very religious, and he, in spite of his very orthodox way of life, he summarized everything. Just be a mensch, and everything else is commentary.
Yes. Nice.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Etty. Just to do a little bit of a translation, a mensch is a Yiddish term for a upstanding person. I was actually literally about to define it by saying it's Yiddish for, being a mensch. And then I stopped myself, but, okay. So I want to, again, in future weeks, we'll do, some breakout rooms and that'll give everyone a chance to, meet each other in a way that hopefully is a little bit more personal. But for now, let me actually just share the document if people want to be able to scroll along with themselves as opposed to having me drive the ship for them, but I'll also share my screen. So I wanted to do some of the most interesting and also some of the more thought-provoking texts in our tradition, but really I wanted to ground this idea of this dialectic between traditional and interpretive, because I really think, if there's one core way to summarize, I think, Jewish tradition, and of course, we're going to have a lot more than one, right? This is an 18-session journey here, but really it is this timeless balance. And I think a lot of issues that we'll study throughout both contemporary rituals and ideas within Judaism and big picture movements and different philosophies can really be studied along this axis of trying to ensure and trying to navigate this balance. And so I wanted to root this in some traditional Jewish texts also so we can get a little bit of a sense of Torah study. I wanted to, pick on some people to read. Nadia, can I ask you to read this verse in Exodus 24?
Yes. Okay. And the Lord said unto Moses, come up to me into the mount and be there, and I will give you the tables of stone and the law and the commandment, which I have written that you may teach them. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Nadia. So just to paint the picture, and then I'm going to place everybody here into the setting of a first century, or in this case, an 11th century rabbi trying to understand this. So I'm going to we'll tackle some critical questions here. So this is the story of Moses receiving the 10 commandments and also the Torah on top of Mount Sinai. So we'll of course go into more depths of the story in future weeks, but the general narrative, the short story is the Israelites of course get freed from Egypt. That is the famous story of the 10 plagues and the sea splitting, and the Israelites are trekking through the desert, and their first main stop is to Mount Sinai, where Moses then journeys up for 40 days, and eventually he receives the famous 10 commandments, or really they're not even commandments, the 10 sayings is a direct translation, and also the Torah. So if you are if you are somebody studying this text, and one of the things in which a lot of Jewish commentary and Jewish interpretation, and one of the core principles really of understanding any text. So this actually, is of course true for the Torah, but if we were all constitutional lawyers trying to tease out exactly what the First Amendment means, and if that applies to Twitter, right, you'd be using actually similar sets of interpretation. If you were trying to ask a question about, right, there's something about this verse that seems odd, right? So I'm curious if anybody here is, interest is piqued or alarm bells are up, or if there's some way in which, if there's some question you have about this verse. And again, feel free to just unmute, shout out, no need to raise hands or anything.
I think in the Hebrew, you have Heyesh Sham. That sounds kind of not part of, it sounds strange.
Yeah. So Eti is talking about the Hebrew here. So Vaheyesh Sham it's I don't even know, translating it literally sounds strange to me also, and be there, and he will be there. So it's a little bit interesting with the tense. I think let's go off you're totally right. This translation, I think, is just trying to nod to the fact that he's saying, you should be there. Although I do totally agree. It is a strange use of grammar.
And the other thing is that they are mentioning here three things. One are the Luchot HaEven, the tablet of stone. Then there is Torah, and then there is mitzvah, the commandment. So they are it's divided to three parts, to three ingredients, kind of. And I always thought that it's Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 commandments, and here they are divided into three.
Yes, perfect. So Eti, you're spot on. If anyone else has any comments, I'd love to hear them. But just to reiterate that answer, right? We're used to at least the standard picture, right? If we were to knock on the door of, we can imagine your average Jewish day school and say, what did Moses receive on Sinai, right? Some might say the 10 commandments, right? You have the famous, right? All sorts of famous, sketches and comics, and ranging from funny to serious, right? Of Moses carrying the tablets. Moses perhaps received the Torah on Mount Sinai. Here it seems like there's three things, right? This is saying the tablets, which are, again, the 10 commandments, the law, which in Hebrew is Torah, and then there's also the commandments. And so somebody reading this text might think, well, wait a minute, what's the difference between the Torah and the commandments? Because I thought before I read this text that the Torah was the commandments. And so just to reiterate that question, I'm curious if anybody else has any thoughts about this before we go into some of the commentaries and then open a can of worms here. Perfect. Okay. So
also,
go for it.
the commandments is singular. It's not commandments.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It says commandments, right? And there's no singular, right? It seems like it's one singular thing. I love it. Perfect. So we'll introduce all of these characters in depth. So we'll actually, one of the things that I usually like to do, I'm just laying my cards on the table, is in, I guess now 17 weeks in the last class, we'll finish with a lot of the same texts, because I think it's actually a really cool educational journey to see these texts perhaps for the first time and to be completely lost, but building a foundation. And then 18 weeks later, we'll revisit them. And I think a lot of it will make sense, at least in a different context here. So I'm laying my cards on the table. And so Maimonides, or the Rambam, who we will introduce in length during our discussion on Jewish philosophy, his claim to fame was he wrote a couple of important books. And his goal, really, at least in his book, the Mishnah Torah, was to write for lack of a better term, a spark notes of all of Judaism and Jewish law. And so really a shortcut cheat sheet for people who have never, for people who, for whatever reason, don't have, and I'm being a little facetious here, because to read through all of Jewish literature would take even the fastest of readers over 18 years. So for all normal people that do not have time to read every single book that's ever been written, you can just visit some of the Rambam's writings, and he summarizes it for us, unless, of course, positions where people disagree with him, in which case there's actually more to have to read, which is part of the joys of Jewish learning. So he writes as follows in his commentary on this. He says, all of the mitzvot, so all of the laws that were given to Moses on Sinai, they were given with their explanation. As it is written, and I will give them tablets of stone, the law and the commandment. This law refers to the written Torah, the commandment, this refers to the explanation. And so what does that mean? He says, and he, Hashem, which is a name for God, commanded to do the law according to the commandment. And the commandment, again, noting the singularity of this noun, this is called Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral Torah. And so he hits all of the points that we got. And what Maimonides is saying, based off of this verse, is that when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, and again, there's probably a wide range, I just want to say this at the outset, there was probably a wide range among the 13 people, whether or not we believe this to be a literal historic story, whether we believe this to be a metaphor of something else, right? We'll, of course, tackle these questions later on. But for the purpose of conversation today, we're learning that when the Jewish people received the Torah in that singular event that really jump-started at least the religious tradition of Judaism, right? The Jews were already a people because they were already traveling before. God didn't just give them a book and say, here you go, enjoy, right? Go figure this out, right? What the Torah is teaching and what Maimonides is teaching is that not only was there the Torah, which is the manual, but there was a commandment to interpret, which opens up again to everything that we were talking about before, which is it's not enough to just have a singular document at the root of your people, right? The Jews wouldn't have gotten very far if we were just the people who read the Torah and the laws of Moses and tried to create a community based off of that. There's this commandment of interpretation. And so I wanted to go to just two stories that I wanted to, or I'll pick on somebody to read. And I think that this will hopefully give enough food for thought that will keep people in, right, really thinking about this next week. And maybe we'll start off next week's class with a little bit of discussion after people have had a week to digest some of these stories. We'll maybe start with even some breakout rooms and we can spend about 5 minutes discussing these stories after a week. Would anybody like to read? Let's see, somebody who has not read yet. Joan, can I pick on you to read? All right, I'll read, and then if anybody else wants to, you can just popcorn me out. I had to, just a funny anecdote, over 2 years ago, so the first fall of COVID, so it could either be 2 years ago or 100 years ago, I was teaching a class of 40 undergrads, all on Zoom, and no one had their cameras on, nobody unmuted the entire first session. And every time I would say something and I was like, please respond. I resorted to asking yes or no questions and having them either give the thumbs up emoji or thumbs down emoji, because I was like, I don't know what to do. But so
I can read if you like.
Perfect. Okay. So
I'm sorry.
No, you are
Rabbi,
good. So just to paint 5 seconds of background to the story. So this is a midrash, or a rabbinic teaching, which is part of this collection of oral stories that Jews have had for thousands of years. And this is coming from the same setting in history. So this is talking about what happens, what was Moses's conversation with God that day that he received the Torah. And so, Joan, go for it.
Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, when Moses went to heaven, he found God sitting and affixing crowns to the letters of the Torah. Moses said, Master of the universe, who detains your hand? Why do you take so long to add these crowns to the letters? God said to him, a man will come to be at the end of many generations, and Akiva ben Yosef is his name. He will interpret on each and every marking. piles and piles of loaves. He said to him, Master of the universe, show him to me. God said to him, turn around. He went and sat at the end of the 8th row, but he did not know what they were saying, didn't understand the teaching. Moses was immediately ill at ease. When he arrived to a certain point, his students said to him, Teacher, how do you know it is so? He replied, it is a halacha, a law given to Moses at Sinai. And Moses was comforted. He then said to God, Master of the universe, you have a man of this caliber, and you give the Torah through him, through me? God told him to be silent.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So this is really one of my favorite stories in really Jewish tradition. So just a couple points about background, and then I'd love to hear, before I bias with any comments here, would love to hear some thoughts just for some of the practical details. If one, and I'll get a picture in a second, if one looks inside an actual Torah at the letters of the alphabet that are written there, one of the things that's immediately noticeable is that inside a physical Torah, there's actually no adjectives and no musical cantillations, which makes reading from the Torah in synagogue a very hard task. But what there is, which is very interesting, is the letters are written and they have little calligraphic crowns on top of them. So it would be as if you're trying to write, imagine a very fancy document in English, and instead of writing, a D for my name, Daniel, you write a D with like a nice little crown on the top. And that's really how letters in the Torah are written. So this is a story based off of that idea of crowns. I would love to hear some thoughts before I don't want to bias anything with any framing here. Go for it. What does the story evoke for you? What's happening? And of course, take a few minutes to digest.
I had a question.
Yeah, go for it, Nadia.
Well, I guess, okay, the way I'm interpreting it is like Moses is kind of like sassing God. Like if you have this man of this caliber who's, gonna interpret each and every marking, pause and pause of laws, like, why are you putting that onto me? Like, why am I taking on that responsibility? And I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, why is he doing that? Why is he saying that to God?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nadia. And I think it brings up a wider point, which I think is really interesting, that both the Torah and the Talmud is the corpus of literature from 0 to 900, they're filled with sarcasm. I mean, like really in a humorous way, but also I think a really Judaism. I'll try to make a grander philosophic point, and then I'll end by saying something a little more banal. I really think Judaism from the outset, and we'll of course explore this when we talk about overarching narratives of Judaism, started off and really I hope continues to be a community that is not anti-authority for its own sake, but very skeptical of authority. I mean, even just the big picture Jewish story, if we think about it, is a story of being freed from Egypt, which was the world empire, which was ruled by Pharaoh, a man who thought he was God. And the whole origin story of the Jewish people, which again we'll explore, so I don't want to get too into it now, is really the story of the underdog and being anti-authoritarian in the sense, and trying to go to a interaction with God, right, that is more relational instead of more hierarchical and dominant. And in the ancient world, being God was a position of dominance. And when I say being a god, I mean the men who ruled big empires who held everyone they were gods, which then gave them, in their mind, of course, this is a descriptive, not a normative statement, gave them the right to do whatever they wanted to their subjects and to the people that they owned and their vassals and all of these things. And so the big picture Jewish story is a story really of a people that are in relationship with God and back and forth. And there's, tons of wonderful stories. I'm just, one that comes to mind is when Abraham is introduced, and he's sort of thought of in Jewish tradition as the first person to have this realization that perhaps there is just one God, and that God wants justice and not, wants a power trip. And God, one of the first conversations Abraham has with God is actually calling out God for a perceived injustice. God is going to destroy these twin cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham comes, and the first thing he says to God is not, oh yeah, you do whatever you want, God, you're God. He says, what are you doing? Is the ruler of the earth not going to be just? And so it really, this seeps down to Jewish tradition as a whole. The next story actually is going to have a lot more sarcasm. So get ready for that. But one of the interesting things that I find about Jewish tradition is that the literature, even from the Torah and from the Talmud, right, are the holiest books, are full of these types of interactions with God, really as a partnership. So I agree, this is totally sarcastic. And even God telling him to shut up, I think, is a little bit sarcastic. This is actually a nicely edited English version. I think in the Hebrew, it's literally the Hebrew word shtuk, which is probably better translated to shut up. And so yes, this is totally an interesting back and forth. And also getting to the fact, just the last thing I'll say, is that to some extent, this also reflects Jewish tradition's willingness to not know the answer to everything. And which I think is also a very important thing, and probably also an important thing to get across in the first text, is that if people are coming here expecting to be told the answer to all of the biggest philosophic questions in life, you might be slightly disappointed. And I say that a little facetiously. And really, right, I would argue that any singular person or singular tradition that says, I can give you all the secrets to life, just follow these 10 steps, right? That is probably something that should be avoided. And so one of the interesting things that comes across in Jewish texts, and this text is probably 1900 years old, is the rabbis. And when I say the rabbis, I mean the people who passed on this tradition. They are acknowledging that they don't actually know certain things, right? Maybe the rabbis themselves are wondering, we seem to be a lot smarter than this Moses guy. Why did God give him the Torah? And it reflects the limits of their own understanding. And so I think that that's also a very important piece there. So I love it, Nadia. Any other comments or questions about this or interpretations of this wider story?
I think that according to the Torah story, Moses was quite he didn't want to do this job. And he gave God all these excuses that he's not good in speaking and he's that and he's that. He didn't want to do the job. So it might be that in between the line, we are understanding here the frustration of Moses.
Yeah,
that he is being put in a position that he has to liberate the whole people. And he says, I'm only a shepherd. What do you want from me?
Yeah, thank you for that, Etty. Yeah, Moses also shows a lot of humility throughout the story. And we'll also give in the in an email sometime this week, we'll include all the chapters from the book of Exodus that we're discussing right now, just for people that want to read it or review it. So I love that comment. Any other? Let's take one or two more. Perfect. Well, feel free to cut me off if there are any more comments. So just to give an interpretation, right? I'll never say the interpretation because There are many, of course, possible interpretations. So this is, I think, the perfect balance of all of these ideas that we were talking about, because this is a story of Moses going up. And as, Etty said, Moses is, timid, maybe he's already doubting himself, and he sees God adding all of these sort of extra things. And he wants to understand what this is for. And God basically tells him, yes, I know you're the one writing the Torah, right? You're the author. You're the original collaborator in this document. There are going to be Jews in future generations that are going to take this and build things that you would have no understanding of. And so Moses, of course, right, says, well, I would love to see it, right? Who wouldn't? And so Moses time travels about 2,000 years in the future, and he plops in a classroom in probably the Galilee, right? Rabbi Akiva lived in the north of Israel, right? The Galilee in the 2nd century CE, and he's in the back of the classroom. And I think that the symbolism of him sitting in the 8th row, I think, is really interesting, right? Because the best students, it's a generalization, so it's not true for every student, but usually the better students sit, right up front. And then if you're a student who specifically sits in the last row of class, it probably connotes, right, a perceived lack of attention or caring about the material. Whenever I say that in a class with a bunch of undergrads, they all find it hilarious because everyone immediately turns and looks at the last row. But so Moses, again, he is in the back of the class, right? He is the student that has the least understanding, and he begins to get depressed because he came up with this tradition, right? He is the writer of the Torah. He was there on the day it happened, right? How could it be that he has no understanding of what's happening in Judaism? And then here comes the paradox. Rabbi Akiva is teaching, and his students say, Rabbi Akiva, how do we know what you're saying is true? And Rabbi Akiva says, what do you mean? It was part of this corpus of tradition that Moses got on Sinai. And so Moses, who has no understanding of what's going on, is just listening to an answer being given by Rabbi Akiva saying, we know the answer because it was taught to Moses. So if you're Moses at this point, you probably want to raise your hand and say, sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about. But at this point, Moses is comforted. And Moses, all of a sudden, right, it seems like something changes. He says, I got it, right? The point of coming up with a tradition or a text or the Torah is not for it to be set in stone, right? It's a good thing that Rabbi Akiva in 1800 years or a rabbi in 4,000 years, right? Today's era is reinterpreting and finding new ways of understanding. Because if not, the whole thing is for some reason irrelevant, but it's still rooted in that tradition, right? It's still, when there's new Jewish innovation that happens, it's not perceived by the teachers and the community as, I am interpreting this ground because I want to reject tradition. It's seen as a part of tradition, right? And here's the paradox of Jewish interpretation. And Moses is comforted, not because he's like, oh yeah, I remember hearing that, precisely because he realizes it's probably actually a good thing that I have no idea what's going on. And then he goes into this last part. If he had more time, the story actually goes on a bit, and perhaps in a future session, we can talk about these stories. But then he starts to question God. And Moses is interesting, and we'll just end with this source in a minute or two. And I know Marcia has one final thing to understand. Moses oftentimes comes across as a questioner, right? It's Moses who asks God in when he's up on Sinai for God to show him his glory. And so Moses spends his whole life trying to understand God, right? He encounters God in the burning bush and he asks God to give a definition, right? Moses is somebody who wants firm answers. And one of the interesting interactions between Moses and God is that he never gets good answers, right? When he confronts God at the burning bush and says, hey, tell me your name, God says, I am who I am, right? Of course, we can read that as a deep metaphor, right? From another perspective, it's God telling Moses, you can't really know who I am, right? Moses asks again on Mount Sinai years later and says, God, show me your glory. And God says, well, you can't see my glory, right? That's not for you. And so as Nadia commented in terms of the sarcasm, I think this is a long line in Moses being rebuffed by God. And I think the rabbis are trying to make the point to some extent of there are some of these questions that are at the limits of our understanding. And one such type question is asking exactly why God chose to do this thing and not that thing. And so to some extent, the rabbis, I think, are trying to drive home an argument here. And this is the last thing I say, so we can give Marcia a couple of minutes to conclude, is that the goal is interpretation and is creating a community of interpreters and a community of studiers that are based around a tradition. And if that doesn't result in concrete black and white answers to all of life's questions, that's also okay. And that in some way, the journey of having done the studying and the interpretation is in and of itself a form of answer that is a lot less perhaps black and white in terms of dogmatic, but is just as important and meaningful.
Daniel, that was so interesting. And by the way, if many of you are going like, that is so complicated, it is. Like what Daniel just taught you today, like I was already 2 years into the seminary before we learned that. So it was you like jumped to the head of the class. I wanted to share with you three things. All the books that I'm recommending for you to buy. This is To Life. This is what it looks like by Harold Kushner. This was written in the late 80s. And this was, Harold Kushner just passed away. He was the guy that wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Wonderful author. You can buy these on, used Barnes and Noble or whatever for like $1 because people, clean out their library. So this is also something I'm going to recommend. This is Jewish Literacy by Joseph Tilchin. I think you can see it. It looks like this. There's an older cover too. This is almost like a little bit of a Cliff Notes encyclopedia about everything in the world that's Jewish that he could think of. It's kind of hard to, but you can just open to any entry. So I put we're going to do Jewish calendar next week. So I gave you the entry on the Jewish calendar. This, if you're looking to live kind of more Jewishly, this is called Living a Jewish Life by Anita Diamant. It's a great book. It's very useful. What do you do on Passover? What do you do on Hanukkah? And very easy, in useful, very user-friendly ways. And the thing that's amazing about Anita is that she was a completely secular Jewish woman until she fell in love with a guy who wanted to convert when they got married. So she took an Intro to Judaism class with him. And after she took the class, she's like, how do I not know any of this? And she became super Jewish. So that was really interesting. And then this is the Hebrew scriptures, the Tanakh. And this is the Jewish Publication Society Tanakh. And you can get it all in English. And we're going to do some reading from this during the course. So you want to get that. And then one other book I recommended was The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. And almost all of these you can buy used. And so anyway, as I said, next week, I'm going to do like a mad dash through the Jewish calendar. And then at the end, if Daniel can join us, we're going to close with what he was going to close with today, but it's a lot, but we want to go back. I think if we can do a little text study every week, that's going to be like a very meaningful, engaging thing. It might feel weird now, but you're going to grow to love it. I promise. So now I want to share with you this totally wacky movie. The title of this class was, What is Judaism? Is it a religion? Is it a culture? Is it a people? Is it a this? Is it a that? Today, you saw, we started to learn that it's a dialogue and it's a conversation that's been going on for thousands of years. I want you to, if you can stay and watch this movie, it's about 11 minutes. I think you'll find it fascinating. And I'd love to know what you think. And if you have to go, no problem. I can send you the link, but it's not very long. Any questions before we show the movie? Comments, Peanut Gallery? Okay. You can write to me too. You all have my email.
Okay.
Here we go. Hang on. Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get rid of all of my little pop-ups here. Not
Over
super
6
loud.
billion people live on the planet Earth. Thinking of them as a tribe of 100 people, there would be 60 Asians, 14 North and South Americans, 13 Africans, and 12 Europeans. 30 tribe members would be Christian, 18 would be Muslim, 13 Hindus, 6 Buddhists, and 33 would be other faiths, including, of the 100 tribe members, 1/4 of one would be Jewish. Within this circle, there was a woman named Ruth who created the Barbie doll. A Jewish woman created Barbie. Maybe Barbie can explain something about how this generation responds to being Jewish today. Since the old days, Jews refer to themselves as members of the tribe. But what does it mean to be a member of a tribe in the 21st century? A tribe is a group of people with something in common. For example, a tribe of hunters, a tribe of gatherers. Tribes can have other things in common, like interests or family. A tribe may have within it a smaller group or subset called sub-tribes. For example, the American tribe includes the sub-tribe of Democrats and the sub-tribe of Republicans, as well as many other sub-tribes. Although sub-tribes may disagree, they remain members of the larger tribe. Within the tribe of girls, there's the sub-tribe who love horses, and the sub-tribe who love Barbie dolls. Even within the tribe of boys, there's a sub-tribe who loves Barbie dolls. There's also a large sub-tribe that doesn't love Barbie dolls. But all sub-tribes can agree, Barbie doesn't look Jewish. Barbie's creator was named Ruth Handler. Barbie's full name is Barbara Millicent Roberts. Not such a Jewish name. Throughout her doll life, Barbie's had hundreds of identities. She's been astronaut Barbie, flight attendant Barbie, presidential candidate Barbie, and wedding Barbie who wears a diamond ring. Diamonds are formed when carbon is subjected to intense pressure over long periods of time. They're also a girl's best friend. Diamonds are often exchanged as part of Western marriage rituals. All tribes have marriage rituals. In the Jewish marriage ritual, the groom breaks a glass. This is symbolic of the fragility of life and in remembrance of the past. The American Jewish tribe has many sub-tribes. They're often arranged in terms of how observant they are: Orthodox, conservative, reform, renewal, unorthodox Orthodox, atheist, and many other sub-tribes. Ultra-Orthodox, Modern Orthodox, Hasidic, Reconstructionist, the Super Jew, the Kabbalahist, the Catholic who's into Kabbalah, the Jubu, the Julu, and the Hindu. Outside of religion, there are many cultural distinctions between Jews. For example, in New York, everyone seems Jewish. While in California, no one does. All American Jews share some things in common, like culture, heroes, and stereotypes. Too pushy, too greedy, too materialistic, too Jewish American princessy. In America, we don't have princesses. We have celebrities. The glorification of celebrities creates a culture of insiders and outsiders. Throughout history, the Jewish tribe has been treated as outsiders. As a result, Jews feel a special empathy with fellow outsiders. Maybe this also explains why they invented a bread with only an outside. Although Jews are often outsiders, when they meet other Jews, they feel like insiders. One might say the essential Jewish perspective is standing outside and looking in. America loves stories of outsiders becoming insiders, insiders becoming outsiders, and quintessential insiders like Barbie. Barbie is viewed as both an icon and as a false idol. There's an old story about worshiping idols. It starts with an idol worshiper named Terah. He had a son named Abraham. One day, Abraham heard a voice that said, "If you believe only in me, I will make the Jews into a great nation and give them a homeland flowing with milk and honey. You just have to do one tiny little thing for me." Abraham married Sarah, and they had a grandson named Jacob. Jacob had a dream of a ladder with angels climbing to heaven. Later, Jacob wrestled with an angel who gave him the new name Israel, which means to wrestle or to struggle. Jacob fathered a daughter and 12 sons that became the 12 tribes of Israel. Later, after Moses led them out of Egypt, the Jews got impatient and started worshiping an idol. Moses lost his temper. They weren't supposed to worship idols. However, going to sunny places to worship idols is a hard habit to break. Idolizing Barbie began in 1959. Ruth Handler named the Barbie doll after her daughter. She also named Barbie's boyfriend after her own son, Ken. The Barbie doll was hugely successful. Ruth then discovered she had breast cancer and left Mattel, the toy company she co-founded. Surviving cancer, she then went on to found a prosthetic breast company, thus making 2 fortunes from plastic boobs. Barbie's anatomy is highly exaggerated. If a real woman had Barbie's dimensions, she couldn't stand up. Walking upright on 2 legs is a skill that primates acquired in what the archaeologists call the Pleistocene era. The first records of Jews were found in Egypt in 1300 BCE. Some archaeologists believe ancient Egyptians called Jews Habiru, which means strangers. Wherever Jews went, they alternated between prosperity and persecution. They weren't allowed to own land and were often uprooted, so it was difficult to carry material possessions. They developed portable identities and rituals. They were forced to choose professions they could take with them, like money lending and stone cutting. When Jews had to leave, diamonds were often essential to survive. They hid them in their clothes and in their teeth. Because Jews were strangers, outsiders, and mobile, they were often blamed and scapegoated. The idea that these outsiders might get inside often led to false accusations, persecutions, and murder, forcing them to disperse again. This dispersion is called the diaspora. Without a homeland, the Jewish tribe was on the margins for thousands of years. Since the Holocaust, Jews have promised each other, never again. In 1948, a Jewish state was recognized by the United Nations. Its founders named it Israel, to wrestle or to struggle. What all Jews have in common is persistence, thousands of years of withstanding pressure and surviving against the odds. At the core of all tribes is the instinct to survive. Fight. Flight. Blend in, just like Barbie. When Jews first arrived in America, they also blended in. They changed their names and sometimes their appearances. Ruth Handler's father fled persecution in Poland and came to America in 1907. Ruth Handler modeled the first Barbie doll after the German Lily doll, a sexy toy for men that became popular after World War II. Ruth brought this Aryan ideal of beauty to America, changed her name, and achieved the American dream. Maybe Ruth instinctively knew that Barbie would not only survive, but prosper. And prosper she did. Over 1 billion Barbie dolls have been sold. That works out to around 77 Barbie dolls for every Jewish person. And today there's a sub-tribe of American Jews who grew up with Barbie in an assimilated world. But things have changed. The idea of assimilation is being challenged. American Jews live in a multicultural world where cultures now circulate and intermix freely. And this new freedom allows them to redefine and reclaim their connection to tradition. These Jews like to remix music, cultures, and codes. Their type of Judaism is more of a roll your own. Some in this generation are religious, but many are not. While they don't belong to a temple, they, like other tribes, may connect through culture or family or food or humor or arguing or just plain guilt. Their parents may have outsourced their Jewish education, so these Jews went to Hebrew school, reluctantly. But many got their Jewish education from Hollywood. This generation wants fewer sermons and more conversations. They do believe in healing the earth, but when they get a sermon on Tikkun Olam, they may think kumbaya. They may define kosher differently. Their version of the Talmud is the internet. These Jews may know less about Kabbalah than they do about yoga. Sometimes they marry outside their tribe. They're pro-choice, as in they choose to tell someone if they're Jewish. They rarely experience anti-Semitism directly, and when they do, they don't always speak up. These Jews may not be sure how they feel about Israel. To their parents, Israel was clearly heroic. For today's young Jews, things may look less clear. When speaking to those who aren't Jewish, they may defend it, but internally, they may be unsure. They can believe in Israel and not agree with all of its politics, just as they can believe in America without agreeing with all its politics. Among their Jewish friends, they don't really talk about it. They are part of a whole generation with portable identities and professions, and they have many names for themselves. A cultural Jew. There's the culinary Jew. Some Jews say,
I'm an agnostic.
Or,
I'm an American.
Or,
I'm Jewish. Jewish, yeah.
Or,
I'm a feminist.
Or,
a Jewess.
Or,
I'm unaffiliated.
Or, I'm a bad Jew. Or,
I'm a bad Jew.
Some who, rather than saying that they're a Jew, they might prefer to say they're Jew-ish. Before answering, they may ask,
who wants to know? You Jewish?
And for both outsiders and insiders, Jewish identity can be perplexing.
You're Jewish? Wow. You don't look Jewish. You don't act Jewish. And he says it in this tone that sounds like he's complimenting me. And I say nothing. I say nothing when which combined with a flirty smile translates to thank you. I say nothing because I'm drunk on denial coladas. I say nothing because I got a contact high of someone's anti-Semitic crack pipe. I say nothing because somewhere along my life's graph, I've been swayed to believe that being Jewish is not too cool, not too sexy. I say nothing because I'm in a deep sleep, a snow-white coma, destined to meet my prince 5 years later in the form of stone in Jerusalem named the Wailing Wall. Our lips press, flesh to cool granite. I place folded paper with written prayers for the dead in a nook. In a nook in the wall next to a woman with concentration camp numbers tattooed on her forearm. Surrounded by fervent praying and bodies swaying, I am far more awake than I ever thought possible. I suddenly remember the exodus of the Israelites, and I walk barefoot from the wall in the desert to the bar. Bartender, tell me I don't look Jewish. Tell me I don't act Jewish. 'Cause I'm thinking, I'm saying, what does Jewish look like to you? 'Cause I'm the Hebrew mamita, long-lost daughter of Abraham and Sarah, the sexy oy-baying, matzah-eating, chutzpah-having, non-cheaping, non-conspiracizing, always questioning, hip-hop listening, Torah scroll reading, all people loving, pride-filled Jewish girl. Bigging up all people who are a little miffed because someone tells you you don't look like or act like your people. Impossible, because you are your people. You just tell them they don't look, period.
Each generation wrestles with old questions in new ways. What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be a member of any tribe in the 21st century?
Well, thank you for staying. I just wanted you to, it was a weird movie, but I just wanted to say, like, being Jewish is complicated. And I thought this was like sort of a good way to begin this class, and you just have to Google The Tribe. It came out in 2005, and you can find the video if you want to watch it again. And we'll be talking more about some of the cultural challenges of being a pluralistic, Jewish person. And anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for being with the class. Any last comments before we say goodnight?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are welcome. We'll see you next week. Look forward to
We
it.
got off to a great start. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you and good night.
Good night, Etty.